This episode discusses domestic violence, murder, and sexual assault. While not explicit, listener discretion is advised. Sarah Cailean, a former police officer with a decade of experience, now works as a civilian special investigator and is the host of ARC Media's hit podcasts, Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom and Who Killed Jennifer Judd. She also investigates cold cases with the Cold Case Foundation, a nonprofit founded by FBI Behavioral Science Unit profilers, including Dr. Ann Burgess. In January 2021, Sarah co-founded a research study with Boston College, the University of Maryland, and Johns Hopkins University to improve crime solving through collaboration between law enforcement and experts. Committed to advocating for survivors and victims, Sarah continues to make a meaningful impact in her field on and off set. This is True Crime in Hollywood, Sarah's personal tale. All right, so today's guest is a special treat because this is one of my dear friends since 2019. This is Miss Sarah Cailean. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Celene. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am very well. I'm very well.
Very well and very busy.
Yes, very well and very busy, busy is a good problem to have.
Absolutely. Now, you and I have had so many conversations that have spanned over years about true crime and Hollywood coming together. You are someone that is so well respected in this industry, particularly for the work that you do as a homicide investigator, but equally, you're also a well-respected producer. I'm just going to jump into it. Tell me, how did you get this start in the industry and particularly in true crime?
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. They mean a lot coming from you. I always say that I fell backwards very accidentally into the true crime media space. I began doing consultancy work on cold case homicides, and a little bit later stepped into helping with wrongful conviction investigations. Because I'm a big believer that every wrongful conviction is just a cold case. But a lot of the consulting work I did in the very early days was done on behalf of media. Essentially, it was, a writer who reached out to me the very first time to look into a case that they were writing a book about. And then CNN came into that project. And so it kind of was through there, but the backwards route really happened because born out of that project was an introduction to some homicide investigators, in particular with the Mobile County Sheriff's Office down in Alabama, who were struggling with a couple of their cold cases and just were looking for a different approach. This sort of sense of like, well, if the old way worked, we would have solved this or these handful of ones. And they said, why don't you come down and poke around and we'll give you free reign. We'll assign you, a partner for major crimes. And so I just started doing that work for them. And then that has kind of spread to some other agencies and some other cold case collaboratives. But the overwhelming majority of that work is pro bono. So as a, single mother with a kid in college and bills to pay, the true crime space became a viable option for supporting that work, for funding that work, and for allowing me to sort of live a day-to-day life. It's not an extravagant life, but it is, it does allow me to make ends meet and continue to do work. By its very nature, often there isn't money to be made doing it. And if I had $1 billion, I would do it all for free. But since that's not an option, the true crime space has been a world that's allowed me to kind of keep funding my pro bono casework.
That's incredible. I mean, I know that, but just for anyone listening, the amount of work that you have done over the course of years has been, I've never seen anything like it, to be that out honest. So you wear a few different hats, though, I mentioned before. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, well, I've been fortunate enough, and some of some of it is good fortune in meeting the right people. Some of it also is rooted in what you are talking about now, a belief that I don't just want to work arbitrarily in the space, because I do believe that true crime purely for voyeurism is damaging. It's damaging to the cases, it's damaging to the victims, it's damaging to the investigators. So I've kind of, like I said, in part through luck and in part through curation, been able to find a way to work in the true crime space while also using that as a means of advocacy, using that as a platform for calling attention, not only to the individual cases, but to the broader swath of like, why were these cases cold to begin with? And a lot of times, and you and I have discussed this so many times, and this is where a lot of the treatment of the victims in these media representations is so critical. A lot of it does reflect, an attitude in law enforcement and even the media and the public when these cases were fresh, where if the victim was a member of a marginalized community, a member of a minority, sex workers, somebody with substance use disorder, that the cases were often discarded, not purely out of prejudice or heartlessness, but just because of a lack of momentum all the way around. And that isn't always the case. I mean, I'm working on a case in Kansas right now where that is very much not the case. This is a much beloved member of the community, kind of ticked all the boxes of old-fashioned true crime. She's a middle-class, beautiful white woman. But the case still went cold. And so it's like, well, let's examine that then. Let's examine how that happens in those cases. What errors or what mistakes or what was overlooked at the time, or what technology, or science didn't exist at the time that may have changed things. Because it still causes this sort of cancer in the community when these cases sit cold. No matter who the victim was. And so there's always a different conversation to have. But for me, as a producer, and, then meaning that I'm also like writing and kind of hosting these series, it's important to do it if we can introduce a larger conversation.
Right. Which you have done, and you have done so successfully, particularly with Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom? Wow. I can't even say that without getting emotional.
I know, me too. I struggle with it every day.
So to give context as to why I'm getting emotional, the whole reason that Sarah and I met actually was this particular case. Sarah reached out to me, and we just started having this conversation about this cold case down in Mobile. And if you haven't listened to the podcast itself, I highly recommend and suggest doing so. But the way you approached this case is so unique, and really building that trust and relationship with Amanda. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the case was the 1993 murder of a woman named Renee Bergeron, just outside of Mobile, Alabama. And the case, it's one of those where the discussion about it really does have to be a complex one, because they worked the case very hard. For the first couple of years, there was a lot of legwork put into it. And she was a sometimes exotic dancer, sometimes sex worker. It was by no stretch all she did professionally or, as a human being, obviously. And that's really what we're talking about. But, I do want to be fair to the original investigators in 93, because they weren't so blinded by that they just blew off the case. But what they were blinded by was their own stereotypes of that, and choosing to pursue investigative avenues that only related to the victim in that way. Right. So the assumption from day one, when this woman's nude, dismembered, sexually mutilated body was found, the presumption that it must be a drug deal gone bad because she had a drug arrest like 6 years earlier or something, just took them down paths that were never going to be fruitful. They actively excluded Renee's friends and family, and in so doing, I believe, overlooked some really, really crucial tips. I mean, this is, when I got hold of the case files, I, within a matter of weeks, had zeroed in on about half a dozen really viable suspects, but one in particular who we have been unable to eliminate in this case. There were tips being called in about him
Yeah.
almost from the first week. And he was kind of ignored because he didn't fit into that drug dealer gone bad, or drug deal gone bad, or, was this her pimp? No. Okay, well, it can't be who he is then. And instead, here we are 32 years later, and, we haven't made an arrest yet, but we are closer than ever. We get a little closer every day. And we've examined a lot of suspects, but like I said, we've sort of been able to systematically eliminate them, either, purely through interview process and understanding why they were suspects in the first place. But we've been able to eliminate simply because we were able to place them in another area at that time. I mean, I don't want anybody to think that we have had the same kind of tunnel vision, just on a different path. It was only through getting to know her family and getting to talk to Amanda and Joyce and learn the stories about that individual in her life, going back to the age of, 14, going back 12 years before she was killed. This person was a figure in her life. And most people are killed by somebody they know. I mean, I'm sorry, folks, even sex workers, this is key, is getting to understand this victim. And quite frankly, if you are anybody with an ounce of empathy, if you get to know that victim, your work is going to be more empathetic. You're going to feel something for these people.
Yeah. And you've done that so well, because I have been able to watch you go from nothing to something, especially when it comes to, exactly what you're saying, and being this added voice for Amanda. That's one of the things that stuck out to me most, was that I don't even know if I can repeat the story because it's going to make me cry.
Oh.
But knowing how much Amanda, in the background as a child and now into adulthood and a mother herself, and just seeing the injustices, that her mother was facing during those pivotal years of her growing up, was something that I don't think I ever would think about until you told me this story, and then being able to meet Amanda on Zoom. I mean, it's incredible for what you have done, and then on top of that, working endlessly, traveling to Mobile multiple times throughout a year. I mean, when I say that you are someone to have in your corner, I mean it, because you're going to do it until you get answers. And I love that about you. But with that being said, we also look at the examination that you touched on earlier about ranking victims. Even though that isn't something necessarily that, may not ring as true today, but it's still prevalent and what we are seeing, especially when it comes to the true crime genre. So can you talk about victimology and how that ranking has somewhat shifted, at least over the last few years?
Yeah, I would say that the most important, the biggest step has taken place, and that is we're beginning to verbalize, hey, stop that. Yeah. Right? We're beginning to see, and that really has taken us a very long time to get to that space, because like I said, it really is a combination of the police, the public, and the press, who will either have a toxic feedback loop or a positive feedback loop in terms of the way these victims are talked about. And I think that one of the good things we have seen come out of this kind of renaissance of true crime in the last decade is there has been a positive feedback loop of the, hey, stop that. And we are demanding more of, we as the public are demanding more from the press and the way they speak about these victims. And then that in turn continues not only to pressure the police, because I don't want them to bear the brunt of all of our hostility in this, but sometimes sometimes that pressure isn't shame-based. It's to demonstrate that this is something that the community they police and theoretically, serve and protect, that community considers this a priority. So it's okay to continue to fund this, or to continue to spend man hours or human hours on this investigation, where there was a time when it was a little easier for for everybody to just kind of go, well, we're really struggling with that one. We hit a brick wall, and now there's this other thing. And there really are only so many hours in a day and only so many people in a police department. I mean, when we see portrayals publicly, and this is not propaganda, I am just as likely to scream and flip off random patrol people because I got mad at something that the cops did as like anybody else. And meanwhile, I have a badge in my purse. But what I do think is important is that we all have this perception of the police through the lens of like NYPD, LAPD, Philadelphia PD, where I am, right? Where we're talking these agencies with budgets of like billion with a B dollars. The overwhelming majority of police departments in this country, more than 80% of them, are classified by the DOJ as small agencies, meaning 50 or fewer total people. So that's officers, admin assistants, everybody involved, and most of them are way smaller than that 50 number. And when you're talking about an investigative agency like that, where they might only have one detective or two detectives in the entire department, suddenly the hours in the day do actually begin to really affect a case, whether it moves forward or not. And so when we as the public are saying, no, we really care about this victim the same way that we care about a little kid that goes missing or something, then it gives them the permission structure to keep working on that case in the way that it needs to be worked on so that it doesn't go cold to begin with.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is that, we're now examining cold cases through that same lens of saying that getting to understand the victim and know the victim and recognize the value in that victim's life simply for who they were. They don't have to be. I mean, we talk about the framing of like, she was a mother, she was a sister, she was a daughter. Okay, but she was also just a human being.
Exactly.
Or he, and they are deserving of an investigation. They're deserving of justice in their own right for no other reason than that. Yeah. And so this, the fascination with cold cases, I think, has also ramped up because so many cold cases are rooted in cases that went cold for those reasons we discussed. Again, not all of them, but a lot of them. And I think the last piece of that puzzle, and this was what I really kind of wanted to do with Amanda's mom, was to ask people, like, we're putting that pressure on the media, we're putting that pressure on the police. I want us to check that in ourselves in every moment, because all of us, I believe, have read a headline in a paper about some terrible crime and then got to a line where it was like, oh, and she lived here, or she did this, or he was unhoused. And there is a moment when we go, okay, that's not me. Mm-hmm. And it's that moment that I want everybody to catch and recognize in themselves, because it will make you a more honest advocate. It'll make you scream louder at the press and the police if you recognize that, shit, even I do that. Yeah. And even I sometimes, in a moment can forget the value of these individuals and the value of the people around them. Like you said, like Renee wasn't the only victim. That's her daughter is, a wonderful, successful, happily married mother. Like you said, like she has lived a life that Renee would be enormously proud of. Right. But there is a hole in her heart that will never be filled, because not only was her mother taken from her, she was then spat upon. Yeah. And it took a lot of years for somebody to come along and say, I'm gonna give this the treatment that it deserves. And I can tell you, the first time I brought Amanda into the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, there was a like trailer-sized chip on her shoulder. And mm-hmm. she was pissed. She didn't want to talk to anybody because she had reached out to people, years earlier. It was a different team. And the very first thing that now Sheriff Birch said to her, he, reached out, shook her hand, and she's just glaring at him. And I will never forget the look on her face. And he said, this should have happened a really long time ago. And she just melted. And that was what she needed to hear, was that somebody gave a shit.
Yeah. And even her grandmother, or Renee's mother, Joyce, she also wrote letters asking,
endlessly begging them to talk to her about who Renee was, to talk about her friends, to get to know the people in her life. They actively dismissed her.
Yeah. And that's huge. And just like you said, it's like recognizing that victims are actual people. They may not be, by the Bible of whatever, a person's supposed to be. But I think that was the part that struck me when you first came to me about this case, was that this is a mother, but because she has this in her past, she's not treated as such. She's not treated as a mother, then she's treated more so as a sex worker. And so just giving that context and also being able to hear you advocate for Renee in the podcast was something that I know not only stuck out to me, but stuck out to listeners. And I remember seeing commentary on that of, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was something to the effect of talking about Renee renting a place, correct? And I think they were saying that the rental was in a male's name, I believe.
Yeah, so her boyfriend, who she lived with in the last, for the last like 6 years, they were on and off, but the last year that she was alive, she was living with her boyfriend, Maurice. And one of the two original investigators on that case had passed, but the other is alive and what, spoke openly with me when I took over the case. But one of the things that he and I ended up kind of going a few rounds about was, he was like, well, look, she used everybody. She lived off of everybody. She was perfectly happy to live in Maurice's house and spend his money and drive his car. And I kind of lost my shit, because the original file, like since almost day one, when they started collecting stuff out of Renee's house, they had the lease, which was in Renee's name. They had the title to her car, which she owned outright, and it was in her name. They had her boyfriend, who and he is not the person, we were able to eliminate him. Obviously, he's a natural suspect. And there was a history of domestic violence with him. And so that was a place we went pretty quickly. We were able to eliminate him based on some location stuff and everything. He kind of lived off her. He was a musician who worked only part-time in like Sears and stuff like that. And quite frankly, she made good money.
Yeah.
And Maurice lived off her, if anything. And when that detective goes, well, that's not what I heard, I was like, I don't know what you heard. You had the documents in front of you. Yeah. In front of you. And that's what you chose to believe instead. And you're just wrong. And again, so you pursued completely stupid theories when the evidence was there in front of you, but you could not accept. Humans are complex. Even the most perfect, rosy victims are complex and have said shitty things or pissed somebody off. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no victim above being painted in a particular light should somebody choose to do that. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a network or a detective, you can find something to make any victim seem unsympathetic.
Oh, yeah.
But quite frankly, you can find anything to make any victim seem sympathetic as well. And that's how you're going to get more communication. That's how you're going to get a better response. And you're going to get more help from the public, from their family.
So while we're on that trajectory, we also know, oh my gosh, and I'm sure everyone's going to be like, she just says this every time. But
well, sometimes we say these things over and over because they're true.
Exactly. But I will say this true crime uptick, if you will, especially over the last, 5-7 years or so. There have also been podcasts and documentaries that also start dabbling into a cold case where people are not actually licensed to do that. That's not like their actual career. And it's more out of this like, well, I'm going to create this podcast about this cold case. But when you're not directly in it, can you talk about like the convolutedness of that and how it could actually teeter a cold case going a different direction?
Yeah, the problem with this, without naming a whole lot of names, is that there have been a very few select examples of somebody without either journalistic or, criminal investigative training, understanding, philosophy, ethics. There have been just a couple of people who have come in and said, I'm just going to do this because I think I can, drawn enough attention to a case that it was given attention and a case ended up solved. Okay. That's great. But unfortunately, that is the exception to the rule. And more often than not, what happens is if somebody who does not know what they're doing steps in because they think they can, or because it looks easy, or it looks like a path to money. They are going to put themselves in danger. They are going to put the case at risk, or they're going to do significant damage to a victim's loved ones. And sometimes any combination or all three. And that train wreck is what we see far more often than the like, oh my God, this person did get a bunch of attention for this case. They reopened it and found some DNA and solved it. You know, that's great when it happens, but that is not what usually happens. Instead, what you have are sobbing loved ones who were barely holding it together to begin with, just left in the wake of somebody who's like, oh, well, that didn't work. And, you know, moving on to something else.
Yeah.
You know, and like I said, don't go knocking on doors if you don't know who's on the other side. A homicide investigation is not to be trifled with. Go knock on doors by myself, unarmed. You know what I mean? If I'm in an area that is, you know, and I've done enough work with Mobile County now where I've become deputized. But even so, I go with my partner. We go together when we knock on these doors.
Yeah.
We are both highly trained, decades of training in law enforcement, and can handle ourselves hopefully long enough to get, you know, back up there if need be. You walk in with a microphone and are like, hey, I want to talk about this murder. And you think you're interviewing a witness and it turns out it's the goddamn suspect. That can go south real fast. And we haven't, thank God, we haven't heard about that. We have heard a lot of the damaged loved ones being treated poorly in those cases. But I'm telling you, I am just waiting for some amateur podcaster to get murdered by a suspect. Not waiting in a good way, but I'm like holding my breath that that's going to happen because somebody thought, I really want to do this and I think I can do this. Like, just trust me, there are other ways you can help.
Exactly. Then that, and I think that transitions to a great topic that I would love to bring up, especially with you. So as a true crime producer myself, what we often do is submit a FOIA request, and that would be a Freedom of Information Act. For the people who are not in the know of what this is, essentially you can put that in, you know, to a sheriff's department, into a police department, attorney generals, and get these documents from a case. And that can include crime scene photos and a lot of information to sift through. I am on the fence about this because I've done a lot of freelance producing, so I know this is very commonly done, which is fine in terms of like making sure you have facts and, you know, accurate timelines and all of this. However, there's also still sometimes really sensitive things in there, but also really traumatic things that people like myself who are not in law enforcement or have had any type of training for that, and seeing some of these photos, looking at these documents and reading just the most horrific things possible. So when I say like true crime is the Wild West at times, it's because there is access to these items to then relate to just what you're saying. Like, okay, well then now I can put all this together into a podcast, blast this out. But in reality, that could cause more damage, especially for a cold case. And more times than not, thankfully, and I think this is also within means of like true crime being, you know, entertainment, I am noticing a lot more departments are firming up on that or have it in a way that it says like a loved one has to sign off on this particular thing. Because this is also another thing that you and I have talked about extensively. When it comes to true crime and looking at pictures, or like I said, reading documents that are not, you know, something that we have trained for, I think from my world, it is extremely damaging for me. And so being able, can like you put that in context, especially for you, like as someone who regularly looks at these photos and how you could see that possibly being I don't want to say a bad thing, but like it could definitely traumatize somebody, as I feel it has for me. in some
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, I went into my first academy in 1998. So I've been doing this for a minute. And that was a federal academy. So we kind of, I started right out of the gate. Like there is one crash scene that I had to, for an advanced traffic crash investigations class that I had to do, that like to this day that those photos haunt me because I was not prepared for like what was going to suddenly come up on this screen. And so I've had many, many years of this, and I constitutionally I'm made of fairly tough metal with years and years and years of experience of it. And sometimes it's not even just the photos, like you pointed out, it's it's just reading descriptions in the documents and stuff can be upsetting. It is traumatic. It is a type of trauma, and we have to recognize that. So if you are coming into it completely unprepared, that is going to F with your psyche. It is going to have an impact. And I don't necessarily know what that impact is because it's probably different for everybody, but I can say that I don't even send crime scene photos to another investigator, or one of my best friends is a coroner. Like, I don't send them photos without a warning. Hey, I'm gonna send this along to you. Is that cool? Because even when you're practiced at it, to come up on it suddenly or unexpectedly, or when you're in the wrong place, can be bad. That humans are not meant to look at other humans like that. And I think that some, like, just as animals, we have a visceral reaction to that. And I think that sometimes people think because they have seen, because TV and movies, because fiction portrayals are so real seeming now, everybody thinks, well, how much different can it be? I assure you, it's very different.
Exactly.
It's very different. It hits differently, it lands differently, and it lives with you differently. I mean, in the last 8 years, as I've spent more and more time working specifically cold cases, and so I spend a lot more time with photos than I do on scenes, I have learned to recognize the cues in my own body. I have a physical response at a certain time, and I start to notice these little things. If I've spent a day or a couple of days straight really absorbed in crime scene photos or discussing it with a criminalist, to like, does the blood spatter here mean that they were moved here, or does it mean here? Having somebody else explain that side of things that I don't know as well to me. You spend so long and it gets so deep, and I have gotten very good at recognizing, like, I'm getting a little irritable. I'm getting a little bit of headache. My chest feels a little bit tight. Like, I'm recognizing those cues better now. And so I'm able to tap out when I start to feel them coming on. And I honestly try, unless I'm in the middle of a Zoom conference and we're all like looking at something, actually, and even in one example of that, I tap out when I can't take it anymore. And I think it allows me to go heal, go fix, go watch New Girl for 5 hours, or something like that, and reset my brain so that I can come back in and be valuable again later. Because what I have found is that when I ignore that, the next time those same pictures come up, I'm nauseated and crying. And how much use am I to anybody if that is the response that I am having? There's one case in particular I'm thinking of, and it's not Renee's case, that I've been working now for 2 years with Dr. Burgess. And I let it go too long one time. I let it go way too long with these crime scene photos, and I struggle with that case to this day. I'm still working it, but I have, like, that one is harder for me than almost any case I've worked, because I pushed too far past that point of just an innate trauma response. And so I would ask, since what you're doing this for, and you can edit this, how you chop it all down, because you are doing this for producers, for people working these things, pay attention. Like, I know if you are on the crew of a true crime show, like, you can't be like, yo, that's cut for today, but pay attention to it. Be kind to yourself, give yourself some grace in those moments. And the sooner you can absent yourself from it, the better. And then you can, move on and be healthy the next round.
Okay. I don't think I've ever heard it laid out like that, especially from someone who has been in law enforcement, but I think what you just said about producers and doing this, I think that's my point, is that here you are working alongside Dr. Ann Burgess, who I will get to here in a bit, but like, and for those who are not familiar with her name, this would be, if you watched Mindhunter, that would be Wendy, correct? Was that
Dr.
her?
Wendy Carr, yeah, was a character based on Ann Burgess. And now Mastermind on Hulu. There's
And
a whole
Mastermind,
series
which I was
just
gonna.
about her. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we will get to that in a minute. You've given now this context that you do have to pay attention to your body. You have to pay attention to your mind. You have to, look at these things. And I think that's the part that's missing when I have been, sitting with other producers on a Zoom and, we're having this conversation. We're talking about, hey, we got these photos and okay, somebody needs to upload those photos into a drive and whatever. And so a part of my workshop is like, we need to be putting trigger warnings on things. We need to be making sure that editors have that quick moment of, oh, okay, let me go, do what I need to do right now to get into this. And that also goes for listening to interviews and listening to really grotesque information, especially when you're talking to law enforcement.
To victims, surviving victims, describing what happened to them.
Yes, exactly. And that is the part where this job is so complicated, because I think for people who are watching this content, an hours on end, they can process that pretty quick. Okay, next case, next show, da 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 da.
Well, and they've self-selected to watch it in that moment. They're in the mood to watch it in that moment.
Right. And that is their decision and they're right. And that's obviously goes to say, yes, if that is your career, that is also your decision. Now, with that being said, I don't think there's really been a moment where we can pause and look at ourselves, at producers, and say, we are jamming this trauma in our brain Monday through Friday for hours. Where's that disconnect? So what I've been coaching, other producers to do is like, when you are off, you do not watch any true crime. You do not go and continue filling your brain with this, because your brain needs to reset, restart, and you also need to process this. And I think one of the first times that I recognized I needed to take up therapy was because of crime scene photos that I saw of one particular crime. And that for me was like, oh, wait, hold on. Why is this like affecting me? Even though I couldn't untangle that. But then now being in the freelance world and knowing, we've got a 10 episode order. So we are just pulling what we can and these documents. And like I said, if someone is uploading that or, labeling these things, it's like this job is so much harder than I think people really want to admit to themselves or don't really realize. So
and that the industry is not acknowledging. And I will say, like, I will preempt for you a pushback from like a network or whatever, to whether whoever you're interacting with as producers is, that if somebody says you got to toughen up, you got to have a thick skin, whatever, who else we've been saying that to for 100 years is cops. And there's a reason that 40% of them statistically are engaged in domestic violence. Some of them are probably just assholes, but some of them it's because, and this is not to excuse it, everybody's responsible for their own behavior and nobody screams louder about the epidemic of DV than I do. But there is we are fucking people up. Yes. And then just saying, walk it off, yes. And, if the industry, now that true crime really is becoming, it's always been around. This is something you and I have talked about. I talk about this a lot in my live lectures and stuff. True crime, it wasn't always called that, but it has always been around. I've got photos of early photography, like late 19th century, of gaggles of women at crime scenes. Like, it's always been women too. But the way that it has gone just atmospheric in the last decade, there are going to be more and more people working on this content. And that is more and more people who just need a job and just need a day-to-day, paycheck. And they're having like this, like you said, this trauma just shoved into their brains. And we are going to break people if we keep doing that without putting on the brakes for a minute and saying, what can we do to make this a better environment for everybody? I'm very glad people like you are being brought in to help with the actual like participants in the series. But you are absolutely right. And it is, you know, we're not too late yet. We probably should have done it at the very beginning of this. But, you know, I mean, at the beginning of this like emergence of true crime, but nobody knew it was going to get quite as massive as it did. It's time now to step in and say, we need therapy lines involved in these budgets. You know, I mean, this is something I'm dealing with the production company right now. We're getting ready to go into our 3rd season of this podcast. And midway through season 2, it's a different, you know, it's a different case. It's not Renee's case. It's a totally different one. I was coming unglued, not from the case, but from some stuff within the community and everything. Like, I was really struggling. And my EP with the production company said to me, he was like, hey, no pressure, but the network wants to know what season 3 is going to be. And I said, season 3 is going to be the disappearance of Sarah Cailean because I'm out. Yeah. And he said, you know, he was like, okay, he texted me back a little while later and he said, not like, absolutely not kidding. I've just been to talk to our money person. We're putting a therapy line in for season 3. And I'm like, thank you. Because this, you know, we all have shit that we're dealing with on these programs, and everybody, it's going to be a different ride for every single person because you're bringing your own life, your own past, your own baggage onto the set. And that is why, you know, stuff like that is so important. Have people who know what they're doing. Just hold your hand for a minute. Like, we're all tough. It's mostly women. Like, we can do this, you know, but like, by God, a little support is in order.
Absolutely in order. And it extends outside of just producers. I talk about this and how to protect your crew on set as well, giving the context of what they're going to be hearing. And that's something that thankfully I was able to do on this last series that I wrapped with, that I was able to go out in the field. You know, I was able to say to the PAs and to the AD and the DP and just saying, you know, I need to stress what you are going to hear today because it is not easy, and this involves children, and so when you give that context, I immediately saw the bodies kind of sit upright a little bit more, and sure enough, after our first shoot, I was contacted by a couple of the crew members and just saying, you weren't lying.
Yeah,
this is really hard,
but at least you prepared them. You gave them something going in so that everything is easier to deal with when you know what you're dealing with.
And you have a choice.
And have a choice.
The other big part of it too is like when we're, you know, looking at staffing these shows as well, it's like, great, you know, like, okay, this is what the concept is. Fantastic. All right, that sounds great. Going alongside the trauma survivors and watching them walk through that process in front of you is another element, because now you're also watching them process that and going back to that place where it is so dark and it's so embedded in them. And then you as a crew member or producer, you're observing it. You're observing it. And that's
taking in their reaction. You're taking it all in. Yeah.
You're holding that in. These shoots were going, you know, 10 hours on a good day, you know, but it's like, I'm trying to bring the humanity back to that, of saying to people, this isn't normal. And I don't like the word normal, but like, you know, this is different. We're not going and, you know, filming a campaign trail. You know what I mean? It's like, we're going to the darkest.
Although some of those are probably
Those are probably equal. Fair enough.
Some of them are threatening the people filming. No.
Yeah, there's that too. But I think, yeah, I'm going to segue a little bit because you started bringing up domestic violence, and this is another area that you and I have consistently have talked about for years now. You are someone that has explained, you know, especially like sexual serial predation and going into these, you know, these worlds, into the minds of these rapists and murderers, and you also live in that realm. And so
my guys, as I like to call the serials.
There we go. Yeah, you also are in that realm. And so that has led you to Dr. Ann Burgess and watching Mastermind, people, please. Once again, this is another, I'm not even calling it a shameless plug. I'm just plugging this.
Yeah.
Because it is one of the best documentaries I have seen in a minute. And learning about her whole start to where she's at today.
Incredible woman that we all, every single day of our lives, owe the entire free world.
Yes.
And particularly women who have to interact with any type of an investigation.
Mm-hmm.
No matter how awful it is, I promise you it was worse before Ann Burgess came along.
I mean, I was in shock, but wasn't in shock. So you can find this doc series on Hulu. And so as a rape survivor myself, being able to watch what she has built from the ground up to still the system that's still broken today was like, poof. So when I have someone like you in my corner who also focuses on just such important aspects of these crimes, there's something to be said about that. So
I learned from her. That's why I learned about her literally a week into my first academy. And I was like, oh, there it is. Because I knew I wanted to do something investigative-y, and I knew I'd been fascinated with serial predation and like that kind of interpersonal violence, I don't give a shit about like mafia stuff or what, you know what I mean? Like there was a very specific type of crime that had fascinated me from the time I was a young child. Yes. And when I read her name and even just a blurb about what she was doing, I was like, that's it. That's it right there. This is possible. And it is possible for a woman in this field to do that.
Right. And you are making it known. And that's the part that I love about this. And so
somebody yelled at me on Instagram. A guy said I should investigate why I hate women or why I hate men. After he watched Mastermind, I'm like, that was your takeaway?
Wow. Yeah. Well,
investigate why you hate men. Oh, dude.
But I think there's, lessons to be learned. And so it is so beneficial for me to have someone like you on this podcast because I have learned so much from you. And this is so crucial for not just trauma survivors to hear and understand, but it's also to this industry and two things coexisting. So just massive props to you.
Oh, thank you, Sal.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about your newest podcast and how that's been going, because this is another case that when you shared this case with me, it was just like different world, different realm, from Renee's case, and there's a but. So, and as of today, you are number 5 on that podcast, True Crime Chart right now. So tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So the podcast is Who Killed Jennifer Judd. We call it the second season. I guess the work that we're doing that is kind of becoming this collection is sort of anthology. Obviously, I'm a running theme. But also, there's some nice connective tissue between the 2 seasons for people who listened to Why Can't We Talk About Amanda's Mom. But this is a case that actually sort of goes back in time for me. This was a case that I knew about long before I knew about Renee's. And in fact, it's a 1992 case. I apparently just struggled to get out of the early 90s. It's a 1992 case in Baxter Springs, Kansas, which is right on the Oklahoma line. It's like literally the first town once you cross into Kansas from Oklahoma. And it was a 20-year-old woman, 10:30 in the morning. She was stabbed to death in her home, in her kitchen. She was fully clothed. There was no evidence of sexual assault, although it did strike me from the beginning as a sexually motivated homicide. That's something, if you listen to the podcast, that will all start to come clear as we go. But this is a case where her husband she had only been married 9 days. She was killed with knives from the knife set that was part of her wedding gift. and her husband was at work. He was, he was excluded again, very, very quickly. It's funny that both of these cases that I've covered in podcasts are ones, where I'm constantly like, no, it really is always the husband. In both of these, it's like, actually, it turns out it maybe not always, but investigators zeroed in within 90 minutes of arriving on scene. They zeroed in on one suspect, on a friend of the couple's. And for 32 years, they have been telling everybody without any doubt that they are positive it is that guy. They just haven't been able to prove it, charge him with it. And it has ripped apart multiple families. It has ripped apart a very small community. That man's life has been destroyed. Jennifer's husband spent the last 3 decades believing that he is responsible for Jennifer's death, in that he was close with this man, and that's how this man was in their lives. The tunnel vision on that case is, to me, the problem there. Within Renee's case, there was the question of corruption. There was a question of just really ugly police work. In this one, I don't believe that any of that is the case. I don't believe there's any corruption involved, but I think there was tunnel vision and arrogance that have refused to allow them to see anything else, even when there's some flashing neon signs. A literal serial killer confessed to this case, and the investigators went down and told him that he was lying, that he did not do it. Now, I'm not saying he did. We don't know yet. For the record, I'm not being cutesy. We are waiting on DNA evidence right now. So hopefully before the series finishes, we'll be able to tack another episode onto the end for everyone. And it's possible that he did. It's also possible that he didn't. But just, they were so singularly focused on one person that they ignored a lot of really other good information and other good clues and other good evidence. And this is another agency who decided to take a chance on on a civilian investigator. And they brought me in along with the team that Dr. Burgess and I head up, and 2 others. I don't want to not mention Dr. Victor Petreka, who's also at BC with Anne, and Dr. Michelle Patch at Johns Hopkins. So the 4 of us, created this collaborative. And so we've been working on Jennifer's case as well. And the sheriff's department, this was one of those cases where it was they're eager for help, not just randos, but here's some people who are going to come in and donate their time and their effort to an agency that just doesn't have the manpower or the money to devote to it what they wanted to, because they truly do want the case solved. And so that's where that one is. But yes, we've only dropped 1 episode, and we are all collectively, the producers and I are just sending each other face dropped open emojis all day long, as this thing is just torn up the charts in a way that we didn't expect. So I hope that it's resonating with people, and I hope people join us to get to know Jennifer, and to hopefully, there was a campaign that started by her family almost right after she was killed that was Justice for Jennifer. And I do hope that we're going to be able to, to finally deliver on that. No I always say no promises. I can't ever promise, but I can promise that I will work a case until I drop dead or solve it. So
I'll have you plug everything here at the end, but
okay.
I'm just on pins and needles because I'm so excited for this new season. All right. Now, what do you think? I feel like I know the answer because I know you really well, but what is the most rewarding aspect of your job, but equally the biggest challenge?
It is 2 sides of the same coin. It is getting to know these people who were around that person. I have made lifelong friends in each of the cases that I have worked really closely, where there was a victim's family who we needed to involve. And I am enormously proud of that. And I love these people to my bones. That is all the same though, coin. The other side of that is just this terror that I'm going to let them down. And that it sounds a little like woe is me, and I don't mean it like that at all, because everything is much more magnified for them, obviously. But I really do, I do want them to get an answer. I don't want to be the person who came in and gave them hope and then took the hope away. You know what I mean? Like I want them to give, I want there to be meaning behind that hope, you know, and I don't want to be the source of reopening old wounds if we're not going to be able to finally like suture them, you know?
Yeah, that's important. And you said it perfectly. It is a double-edged sword. I could see that. Yeah, that makes sense. So last but not least, what advice would you give someone who's looking to break into the industry, but particularly in true crime?
I'm taking a long time to answer that because I just feel like there's a lot, but I think to try and distill it down, it really is to be prepared for the gravity of it.
Mm-hmm.
That there can be enormous reward in terms of being able to give these people some answers, being able to bring some justice, but it's very real. That is the most, I guess that is really what it comes down to. This is real.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to work in this industry, particularly I think at like a producer and above level where you're really, you know, truly a content creator, not to say that everybody isn't involved in the process, but like the people who really are gonna, you know, be bringing it out and putting it out there. God, that I'm really flubbing that, but you know what I'm trying to say.
I know what you're saying.
It's really important that you take it as seriously as it is. It is literally life and death, and it needs to be treated accordingly.
Amen. Because that is the truth. That is the truth. It is not a genre for how do I say this? I don't want to say like the weakest link, but like
no, it's you really do have to have a certain constitution to do it well, I think, to be able to muddle through this. I feel the same way about investigations in general. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, right.
It really isn't, you know, and some people are just wired differently. Some people through their own experiences and trauma are either more suited or less suited immersing themselves in it, whether that's the investigative aspect or the production aspect of it. And if you do not believe that you not only are capable of it, but are honest enough with yourself and mature enough with yourself to recognize like when you need help or what you need to bring other people in for and stuff. If you're not able to do that, you just think I can handle anything, you absolutely cannot handle it. Or you're going to hurt somebody or you're going to hurt yourself.
And that's the reality of it, because
and that's okay.
And it's okay. And it's okay to stop and recognize these things. And because I feel like I fell into that a little bit the last few years of, you know, just going to series to series to series. But it was this last series that I wrapped on that made me sit back, and this is the product of it. This is the reason it exists. This is the reason, you know, the workshop got put together, is because I finally was working with trauma survivors, and the amount of trauma that they were sharing with me wasn't just one isolated incident or one isolated night. It was continuous and for years, and being able to be the first person that they talk to on a production, learning their story with no limits, because I think it's also really important that I call out and recognize that a lot of these series that people are consuming, so much is left out. That can also be said about Amanda's mom as well in terms of investigations, and I want to stress that very so. And please understand that, like, when it comes to storytelling, especially in the media, it's gonna be crunched. It's going to potentially have misinformation, or something may be misconstrued. And
or
so
in cases like mine, I mean, I'm not sure how many like active homicide investigations the actual detectives are releasing podcasts in. I might be in mostly a class of my own. But I mean, one of the things that where, people have hollered at me about stuff from season 1, where I'm like, do you really think we've told you everything about an active homicide investigation? Like, I assure you, there's a reason we feel as strongly as we do about somebody. We're not just assholes.
Yeah, right. And that's what I want to stress right now, is because that is the truth. So when it's my job to pre-interview someone, I hear everything. And whatever they're comfortable sharing or what they remember, because there's also the scenarios that, as I'm talking to them more throughout the production process, I learn more.
Mhm.
And it's really hard for me to digest that, because I know that it's not all going to be in the final cut.
Yeah.
So when, I'm spending hours on a Zoom or on the phone with these remarkable people, and I'm sure for you too, like, you get to know a lot of these individuals on a more personal basis. And I think that's where that shook me to my core. And why we're having this conversation today,
And
because
you will become fiercely protective of them when you know them like that,
beyond.
because you are the one presenting them to the world, and you also want to fight the world every time they look at them the wrong way. Yeah.
And I will raise my hand to that and say that, I've probably been a stinker, in producing rooms and, voicing what I think should, how things should be handled or whatnot. But what I will say is that it really starts with the top down. So, this is
It's
why
like a good police department. It's, whatever the leader, the fish rots from the head. And so if you've got an outstanding leadership with strong ethic, that will move down into and permeate the workforce at all levels. And that is true for both of our worlds.
Exactly. And that is what the hope is at the end of all of this. And so that it's not just
we're just creating a whole bunch of new beautiful fish heads. That's what we're trying to do here.
Bingo. All right, we're at the point in this interview where I want people to hear about you a little bit more. But the one thing that always sticks out to me is just like your taste in media and what you watch. And so, what is the most interesting thing you've watched or read recently?
Well, I break Celene's rule number 1, which is I consume a lot of true crime. Even when I'm in the middle of a case, I'm like, boy, that was rough. All right, time for a documentary about this awful murder in Boston. And I consume a lot of crime fiction too. I will say one of the things I'm the most excited about right now, I'm leaving for a very tiny, literally 4-ish days beach vacay with my bestie since we were babies, and we are each reading a Tana French novel, who is an Irish crime writer. She is hands down the best crime writer I have ever read. And
Wow.
she, this woman, when she is talking about the inner workings of the mind of a detective and what they're thinking in that exact moment, I'm like, how is it possible that she never did this job? Because she didn't ever do the job. I am aghast constantly. I am impressed and horrified. I'm like, how is she doing this? It's incredible. So if you like crime fiction, maybe you need to break from true crime. Tana French is the recommendation. So Lauren, my bestie, read, there's a 2-book series, The Searcher and the Hunter, and I accidentally bought The Hunter first. Actually, I found a copy of it sitting on a street in Brooklyn, and it turned out to be a first edition, and I found it the day before the book was actually released. So I got very lucky that some editor somewhere or some book critic dropped it out of the car or something, and I'm like, what the fuck? I got a first edition Tana French. But Lauren had already read The Searcher, which is the first in the series, so I'm bringing both copies with me to the beach. So I'm gonna read The Searcher and Lauren's gonna read The Hunter, and we're gonna compare notes. So that's what I would say is probably the thing I'm the most excited about consuming right now.
I just want to throw it out there though. I do watch true crime.
Yeah,
When
it's
and I think
I'm fussy. I'm fussy about my true crime.
yes. And but it comes in like waves of like
Yeah.
me feeling like, okay, I'm in a good spot where I can watch this. I mean, truly when I'm producing something and in the thick of it, I don't. But like
Yeah.
right now where I have some time to myself, then I will go back and start watching, other true crime series. But
I've also only very recently joined the Pedro Pascal bandwagon. And so I have been rewatching The Last of Us and watching Narcos like simultaneously. So I'm getting a lot of Pedro right now. So that's one true crime and one complete fantasy.
well, get excited for Freaky Tales that premiered at Sundance this past year with him, and it actually will
That's
will
the
the realm of
Rodriguez
our
one.
true crime world. So,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
keep an eye out for that, everyone.
What an
All right.
amazing human being.
Oh yeah, great actor. Just yeah, range. Now tell me.
Well, and I like by all accounts, just a phenomenal human being. And he's like he's super active in the trans rights community. Like he just seems like the real deal. And I'm like, I just want to be friends with this person, you know?
Well, fingers crossed that he
Yeah,
hears.
right.
Okay. Uh, now, what's a hobby or passion that people would be surprised to learn about you?
People would be surprised to learn about it. I've been a pretty avid runner for most of my adult life, and that's something after a knee injury a few years ago, I have been starting and stopping in fits ever since. I mean, I was not that long ago, a like 50-mile a week runner. And after a car crash and my knee got really jacked up and I would, get started again and stop and everything, I have fallen back into it in a big way in the last couple months, and it's feeling really good and exciting, and like I'm feeling that love for it again and like looking forward to it again in a way that I haven't felt since before the crash. And so that's really what it is. I think probably is the getting up at like 4:30 and just getting out for a run before the world wakes up. I love it.
I love that though. That's great. Now, one of the things that you and I share, we are foodies through and through. I have made my way out to Philadelphia, and you have never steered me wrong.
It's a good food city. Yeah.
So, local shout out. Who do you want to shout out?
This for me is such an easy one. And they will never hear it because it is a place called Fa 75 at 11th and Washington in Philadelphia. It's the primarily Vietnamese and Cambodian neighborhood in Philadelphia. This is a pho place. It's been written up in the New York Times and the Post. It's like world renowned. They do not serve anything else. This is not a Vietnamese restaurant. This is a pho restaurant. They only take cash. There is like almost no English spoken in the building. And I get takeout from there to bring home and prepare on average 5 nights. Like it is the primary staple of my diet. And so that is who I have to shout out, is the amazing, wonderful people at Fa 75 and the adorable little chefs who, when I come in, go, ha, 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 and like walk to the back and just make my like 3 days worth of pho order and bring it out to the counter. They love laughing at me, but I love them in there.
I love that. And finding a good pho place is hard because
it is hard because there are so
well,
many
we talked
of
about
them.
that when you came out here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's really hard. This place, man, there is like heroin in the broth or something. I've had it all over the country, and I've had some decent pho, but I've never had anything that even came close to this place.
Yeah, my mouth was watering. Now
I know, it's so good. I'm gonna have it for dinner tonight. And I had my leftovers from last night for breakfast. It may be the only thing I eat today.
Literally, like, yeah, she means it, y'all.
I know.
This is her favorite.
It is my favorite.
All right, last question. Who are some of your heroes and how have they inspired you?
Well, the easy one for that is Dr. Ann Burgess, obviously. She inspired me in that she literally kind of, she was the the pathway I saw. I mean, she did her work through nursing initially. I mean, she still does. She considers herself a nurse before anything else. But it was the way that I saw, like, okay, here's a woman working in investigations, but in, you know, in a really, really intriguing way, and like understanding these minds. And that's what I had been fascinated by. And then, you know, I've literally learned from her. I mean, the textbooks that I had to study in school and the lectures that I went to and stuff were all based on her work. And then when I pounded a couple glasses of cab one night, we're like, all right, that's it. I'm reaching out to her, and reached out to her about the Bertrand case when I first was assigned it, and she dove right in. I mean, she answered me immediately, and I've been working with her ever since. She's just incredible, not just because she is brilliant and she did all this important work, but because she truly wants to lift up everybody else who wants to help, everybody else who wants to do the work. She never says no. She never says no to helping somebody, whether it's, you know, a victim or a department or a student. Like she just, all she does is give the world this incredible gift that she has. And I just, she's an inspiration, not just to me professionally, but just as a person.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also take away just her personal self too in Mastermind, and hearing her own children talk about her too. I mean, which is what a
Kids
beautiful.
are lovely too. I mean, they're not kids, they're, you know, they're like men and women in their 50s and
Right.
60s, you know. But no, they're all incredible. And you can tell that they were raised in a loving, supportive home. And they're all funny. Oh my God, they're all funny. Like, yeah, no, they're great.
Gosh. Well, Sarah, this is I wasn't gonna cry.
No, you're not going to.
Uh,
Oh, sweetie.
from the start of you reaching out to me, and for like seeing all the work that I had been doing that hasn't even been seen by the plot book still. but the fact that you reached out to me and said, hey, I only know like tidbits about you from my favorite murder, and you took that chance on me. And
Oh, it wasn't even a chance. It felt like the other way around to me. I was like, if I'm going to tell Renee's story, I want to do it in a way that this woman's voice seems to be like trying to shout to people. And it just, that was something that was evident in you way back then. And it just felt like I was honored that you were willing to, you know, to talk about it and to kind of like start a journey together. And even though we
met in
haven't worked
Toronto.
together formally on a thing like all the way through, like I'm positive that we will, but I also feel like we have just been able to kind of hold hands and shape each other's, you know, journeys so
Yeah.
far, and we're going to continue to do so. I love you so much. And I just, this to me feels like you have really, like, this is what you were working towards all along and didn't even know it.
Yeah. Yeah. And truly, and it has come to fruition because of our hours and hours and hours of conversations, of laughing and crying and just screaming into
Raging. Yeah, I was going to say there's a lot of raging.
and watching it all unfold. And we have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations among this industry in itself. And just so having this conversation today and being able to put that out there for the world to hear is like you said, I mean, I guess we're working that way this process, but the fact that that day is here, it's really special. And I'm just grateful that you're in my life, and all the work that you were doing is finally getting recognized in the way that it should have been from the jump. So let me just go and say that about you, because it does not matter, Sarah. I mean, even my own husband, he just will even say to me, like, Sarah is just one of the most well-spoken people, and she grabs your attention and she makes you listen and helps you learn. And so just for my husband, who's just, you know,
thank you.
Just
thanks, Dunk.
That, you know, that he feels that way, but also knowing that the world is getting to know you in that context too, and know your work and know your integrity, and just being in victims' corners along with survivors. So it goes without saying, thank you for being a pioneer in this.
Goodness, thank you, Celene.
Of course. All right, y'all. I don't want you to hear me cry anymore, so we're going to pause right here.
Don't miss next week's episode where I sit down with Tara Newell. At just 25 years of age, she confronted the infamous serial predator Dirty John Meehan in a harrowing moment that transformed her life. Tara's bravery in defending herself sparked a journey that not only redefined her own path, but also turned her into a powerful symbol of hope and empowerment for many. This is True Crime in Hollywood. Thank you for listening, and as always, remember the victims and embrace the survivors.